What if everything you thought you knew about the NFL draft was wrong? What if the player everyone dismissed, the one teams reportedly passed on 143 times, ended up becoming the most valuable rookie the league has ever seen? That's exactly what's happening right now with Shedeur Sanders. A fifth-round pick, number 144 overall. The Cleveland Browns grabbed him when most analysts had already turned off their televisions. Experts called him a project. Executives whispered about attitude problems. Teams reportedly didn't want the headache. But here's where things get interesting. Within weeks of his first preseason snap, Sanders had generated more money than anyone could have predicted. We're talking about numbers that have Nike scrambling to finalize what insiders are calling the largest rookie endorsement deal in sports history. But this isn't just a story about jersey sales or sponsorship checks. This is about a secret clause buried in his rookie contract that has owners across the league quietly losing their minds. A clause that could change how every future athlete negotiates their worth. And it all started with a draft night that looked like a disaster, but might have been the greatest setup of all time. The 2025 NFL Draft was supposed to be Shedeur Sanders' coronation. Coming off a spectacular career at Colorado, where he'd played under his father Dayan, primetime Sanders, the young quarterback had all the tools. The arm talent was undeniable. The poise in the pocket looked almost unnatural for someone his age. His film showed a player who could read defenses, extend plays, and deliver strikes in the tightest windows. Mock drafts throughout the spring had him going as high as the first round. At worst, analysts figured he'd land somewhere in the second, maybe early third if teams got weird about something. But something strange happened on draft night. The first round came and went. No Shedeur Sanders. The second round passed. Nothing. By the time the third round ended, people started asking questions. What was going on? How was a quarterback with his resume still sitting there? The fourth round finished, and the whispers grew louder. Then finally, with the 144th pick in the fifth round, the Cleveland Browns made the call. The reaction was immediate. Analysts stumbled over themselves trying to explain it. Some pointed to his supporting cast at Colorado, suggesting he'd been carried by talent around him. Others mentioned that his father's presence created a circus atmosphere that NFL teams didn't want to inherit. But the loudest voices focused on something else entirely: character concerns. Reports started circulating almost instantly that teams had issues with Sanders' attitude. He was entitled, they said. He cared more about his brand than the game. His body language rubbed scouts the wrong way. Anonymous executives told reporters that he wasn't coachable, that he deflected blame, that he was too focused on building a media empire instead of learning an NFL playbook. The narrative took hold quickly. Within hours of his selection, the story wasn't about Cleveland getting a steal in the fifth round. It was about whether Sanders had sabotaged his own draft stock by being difficult. The talking heads ran with it. Social media piled on. For a brief moment, it seemed like the league had collectively decided that Shedeur Sanders was damaged goods, a cautionary tale about letting fame go to your head before you'd earned anything at the professional level. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because while the public was being fed a steady diet of character assassination, something else was happening behind closed doors. Something that had nothing to do with attitude or work ethic or body language. According to multiple reports that have since emerged, teams weren't scared of Shedeur Sanders the person. They were scared of Shedeur Sanders the businessman. During the pre-draft process, Sanders and his representatives reportedly made it clear that his contract would need to include certain provisions. Provisions that the NFL had never seen in a rookie deal. Provisions that would give him ownership stakes in his own brand, a percentage of merchandise sales, and control over how his name, image, and likeness were used in sponsorship contexts. This wasn't a player asking for more guaranteed money or a bigger signing bonus. This was a player demanding to be treated like an equity partner rather than an employee. For teams operating under the traditional model, where rookies show up, take their assigned salary, and thank ownership for the opportunity, this was a non-starter. Front offices that had spent decades maintaining strict hierarchies suddenly found themselves looking at a kid who wanted to rewrite the rules before he'd thrown a single professional pass. And rather than admit that they were uncomfortable with the business demands, they did what organizations often do when faced with something they don't understand. They attacked the messenger. The character concerns that dominated draft night coverage weren't coming from nowhere. They were being strategically planted by executives who needed a public explanation for why a talented quarterback kept falling down their board. You can't tell fans that you passed on a potential franchise player because his agent asked for a revenue-sharing clause. That makes you look weak, scared of change, unwilling to adapt. But you can tell them that the kid has an attitude problem. That he's not a team player. That he cares about the wrong things. That's a story people will accept without asking too many questions. What those executives didn't anticipate was that Cleveland would call the bluff. The Browns, perhaps seeing an opportunity that everyone else was too afraid to take, agreed to terms that included the exact provisions other teams had rejected. They signed Sanders to a 4-year rookie deal worth $4.6 million, which was standard for his draft position. But hidden inside that contract was something revolutionary, a clause that would change everything. And that clause had a name. They called it prime equity. The prime equity clause isn't complicated to understand. It's just unprecedented. In simple terms, the provision grants Shedeur Sanders a percentage of all revenue generated from merchandise, sponsorships, and promotional materials that use his name, image, or likeness. This includes jerseys, apparel, sneakers, advertising campaigns, behind-the-scenes content, and anything else that capitalizes on his personal brand. Instead of receiving a flat endorsement fee or letting the team and league pocket the majority of those profits, Sanders negotiated to become a direct financial beneficiary of his own marketability. Think about what this means in practical terms. When a fan walks into a store and buys a Shedeur Sanders jersey, a portion of that sale doesn't just go to the NFL or the Cleveland Browns. It goes directly to Sanders himself, beyond whatever standard player royalty agreements exist in the collective bargaining framework. When Nike puts his face on a billboard or features him in a commercial, the compensation isn't limited to whatever endorsement contract he signed separately. The prime equity clause reportedly ensures that he participates in the back-end revenue those campaigns generate. This is the structure that venture capitalists use when they fund startups. This is how tech founders negotiate when they believe their company is going to explode. This is not how professional athletes, especially rookies who haven't proven anything at the highest level, have traditionally operated. And that's exactly why executives across the league are quietly terrified. The NFL has always maintained a very specific power dynamic. Teams control the money. Leagues control the broadcast rights. Sponsors pay for access to players, and players take what they're given while being grateful for the opportunity. This system works beautifully for owners and corporations. It keeps athlete earnings predictable and manageable. It ensures that the biggest slice of every pie goes to the people writing the checks rather than the people generating the actual value. Sanders just opted out of that entire framework. By insisting on the prime equity clause, he essentially told the NFL that he understands his worth isn't limited to his performance on the field. He recognized that his name carries cultural weight, that his family legacy creates built-in marketing opportunities, and that his ability to drive engagement goes beyond throwing touchdowns. More importantly, he had the leverage to demand compensation for those intangible assets, and he found a team willing to give it to him. The implications are staggering if you think about where this could lead. Right now, Sanders is the only player with this kind of arrangement. But what happens when the next generational talent comes along and says they want the same thing? What happens when a first-round pick looks at what Sanders negotiated and tells his agent to get that clause or walk away from the deal? What happens when an entire generation of athletes grows up understanding that they can be partners rather than employees? League executives understand the potential domino effect. According to insiders, there have already been quiet conversations at the ownership level about how to prevent prime equity from becoming an industry standard. The concern isn't that Sanders will make money. The concern is that his success could fundamentally restructure how value gets distributed across professional sports. Every dollar that goes to an athlete under these arrangements is a dollar that doesn't go to a team or a league. Multiply that across hundreds of players over dozens of years, and you're talking about a massive transfer of wealth from organizations to individuals. Some analysts have suggested that this is exactly why Sanders fell so far in the draft. Not because teams genuinely believed he couldn't play, not because they had legitimate concerns about his character or work ethic, but because they understood that drafting him meant accepting a new paradigm, one where the player has real power and genuine ownership over his economic destiny. Most front offices weren't ready for that conversation. They preferred to let someone else take the risk. Cleveland took it. Whether that decision came from desperation, vision, or some combination of both remains to be seen. The Browns have spent years searching for a franchise quarterback. They've cycled through options that never worked out. Maybe they looked at Sanders and saw a player talented enough to be worth the unconventional terms. Maybe they figured that if he became a superstar, the revenue sharing would be worth it. Maybe they simply didn't want to be the team that passed on greatness because they were afraid of an innovative contract structure. Whatever the reasoning, the deal got done. And once the prime equity clause was official, everything that happened next became possible. Sanders had positioned himself to benefit directly from any success he achieved. The more jerseys that sold, the more money he made. The more his brand grew, the more his earnings reflected that growth. He wasn't just betting on himself. He was investing in himself, treating his career like a business where he held significant equity. The only thing left was to prove that the investment was worth it. And that's when the numbers started getting absolutely ridiculous. $250 million. That's the figure that sent shockwaves through the sports industry. Within weeks of his preseason debut with the Cleveland Browns, Shedeur Sanders had moved $250 million worth of rookie jerseys. Not over a season. Not over a year. In the span of a few weeks, before he'd ever taken a snap in a game that actually counted, Sanders had generated merchandise numbers that veterans dream about achieving across entire careers. To put this in perspective, his 4-year rookie contract is worth approximately $4.6 million. That's the standard compensation for a fifth-round pick under the NFL's wage scale. It's decent money by normal standards, but nothing exceptional by professional athlete metrics. Meanwhile, his share of those jersey sales alone reportedly comes to around $14 million. His merchandise commission is already triple his base salary, before the regular season has even started. The comparison to his father makes this even more striking. Day in, prime time, Sanders lit up the league in the early 1990s as one of the most dynamic and marketable players the NFL had ever seen. His jersey sales set records at the time. He became a cultural icon who transcended football and crossed over into music, entertainment, and fashion. Now his son has matched that energy in a fraction of the time, during what was supposed to be an afterthought preseason window. Nobody in the league office or at Nike's headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon anticipated this happening. The projections for a fifth-round quarterback, even one with a famous last name, would have been modest. Maybe solid sales in the Cleveland market. Maybe some curiosity purchases from Colorado fans who followed him in college. Maybe a respectable showing that justified the initial investment without breaking any records. Instead, the demand exploded beyond anything reasonable models could have predicted. Part of this comes down to the Sanders name itself. Dayan remains one of the most beloved and controversial figures in football history. His coaching tenure at Colorado brought him back into the spotlight in a major way, attracting constant media attention and building a devoted fanbase that follows everything the Sanders family does. When Shedeur entered the NFL, he didn't arrive as an unknown commodity. He came with a built-in audience that had been watching his development for years, eager to support him at the professional level. But the name alone doesn't explain these numbers. Plenty of athletes with famous parents have entered professional leagues and generated minimal buzz. Having a well-known last name opens doors, but it doesn't guarantee that people will walk through them. Something else was happening with Shedeur Sanders, something that turned casual interest into a purchasing frenzy. The answer lies in how his brand was positioned and how the timing aligned perfectly with his on-field performance. This wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated with precision by partners who understood exactly what they were doing. Every element of the rollout, from the products available to the marketing moments surrounding his debut, was designed to maximize impact. And when Sanders delivered on the field, exceeding expectations against legitimate NFL competition, all those carefully laid plans converted into real sales. Consider what fans were actually buying. This wasn't just about a jersey with a number on it. People were purchasing a symbol of something larger. They were buying into the story of a player who'd been doubted, passed over, and criticized, only to emerge looking like a future star. They were supporting someone they felt had been treated unfairly by the establishment. They were participating in a narrative that felt culturally significant, like watching the beginning of something that would be remembered for years. The velocity of those sales also mattered. When something becomes popular, it tends to become more popular. Early reports of strong jersey numbers generated additional media coverage, which drove more awareness, which prompted more purchases. The cycle fed itself. Within days, Sanders' jerseys were everywhere. Social media filled with fans showing off their purchases. Celebrities were spotted wearing his gear. The momentum became self-sustaining. For the NFL and the Cleveland Browns, this was an unexpected windfall. Jersey revenue gets split according to complex formulas, but everyone involved in the merchandise operation benefited from the surge. For Nike, which had bet heavily on Sanders before the draft, this was validation that their instincts were correct. And for Sanders himself, the prime equity clause meant that he wasn't just watching other people profit from his popularity. He was directly participating in the financial upside. The $14 million figure represents just one revenue stream. There are apparel lines, limited edition products, special collaborations, and sponsorship activations, all generating additional income. When you add everything together, Sanders has reportedly already secured more money in his first few months as a professional than most players accumulate in years of grinding through the league. And the regular season hasn't even begun. This is what happens when preparation meets opportunity and unconventional thinking. Sanders didn't just hope that his talent would be recognized and compensated eventually. He structured his entry into the league to ensure that recognition would translate into direct financial participation. He bet on himself and won big, but none of this would have been possible without a partner willing to take an equally bold bet. That partner had been laying the groundwork for years, waiting for exactly this moment. Nike didn't stumble into the Shedeur Sanders business. They saw what was coming before almost anyone else and positioned themselves to be the primary beneficiary. The groundwork started years before draft night, when Sanders was still lighting up defenses at Colorado and building his reputation as one of the most exciting young quarterbacks in college football. That's when Nike made their move, signing him as their first zero football athlete through a nil agreement that would later prove to be one of the smartest investments the company ever made. The zero designation was significant. It meant that Sanders was being brought in at the ground level, not as an established professional, but as a prospect with enormous potential. Nike was betting on the future rather than paying a premium for current production. They saw a young player with an elite skill set, a legendary last name, and a media presence that dwarfed most of his peers. More importantly, they saw someone who understood branding and marketing at a sophisticated level, someone who could be a genuine partner in building something rather than just a face to put on products. The relationship went far beyond standard endorsement territory. Nike wasn't simply slapping logos on Sanders' cleats and calling it a day. They were developing a comprehensive brand identity that would connect his college achievements to his professional future. The Poetry in Motion campaign became the centerpiece of this effort, positioning Sanders as an artist on the field whose game represented something beautiful and intentional. It was the kind of messaging that resonates beyond sports fans, reaching cultural consumers who might not care about football but appreciate aesthetic excellence and compelling narratives. As the 2025 draft approached, Nike's strategy intensified. They created custom cleats specifically for Sanders, ensuring that his footwear would stand out during combined workouts and pro day performances. They developed exclusive colorways of the Air DT Max 96 sneaker, a direct callback to the iconic shoe line they'd created for his father during the 1990s. The connection to Dayan was intentional and powerful, linking generations of Sanders' excellence while establishing Shedeur as a distinct figure in his own right. When draft night arrived and Sanders fell to the 5th round, Nike didn't panic. If anything, they seemed prepared for the possibility. While other companies might have reconsidered their investment in a player whose stock had apparently collapsed, Nike broke months of silence on their football social media accounts specifically to promote Sanders. The message was clear. They believed in him regardless of where he got drafted, and they wanted the world to know it. In the days leading up to his first preseason game, Nike ramped up activity even further. Custom content featuring Sanders flooded social media platforms. Product drops generated buzz among sneaker enthusiasts. The marketing machine was running at full capacity, creating anticipation for a player who, according to conventional draft wisdom, should have been an afterthought. Nike was essentially manufacturing a moment, betting that when Sanders finally took the field, they would be perfectly positioned to capitalize on whatever happened. What happened exceeded everyone's expectations, but Nike's response suggested they'd been ready all along. Within hours of Sanders' impressive preseason debut, the brand had already cut together footage of his signature watch celebration and paired it with the phrase, "only a matter of time." The advertisement generated approximately 200,000 likes and millions of impressions in less than a day. The speed of execution indicated that this content had been prepared in advance, waiting for a performance worthy of release. The product strategy expanded rapidly after that initial success. Nike didn't limit themselves to jerseys and basic apparel. They launched an entire Sanders-branded clothing line that included children's jerseys, women's cuts, premium authentic game jerseys priced at $175, limited edition shoe releases around $200, and design shirts in the $30 to $50 range. The goal was comprehensive market coverage, ensuring that fans at every price point could participate in the Sanders phenomenon. Perhaps most impressively, Nike invested in a Times Square takeover featuring massive billboards of Sanders in his signature watch pose. This wasn't local Cleveland marketing. This was a global rollout designed to establish Sanders as a cultural figure whose relevance extended far beyond football. Nike was treating a fifth-round rookie like a generational superstar, and the sales numbers were proving them right. The long-term vision reportedly goes even further. According to insiders, Nike is actively developing a signature shoe line for Sanders with working titles like LL to C and Proto 92. This would be essentially unprecedented for a rookie quarterback. Signature shoes are typically reserved for established superstars who have proven their worth over multiple seasons. Giving one to a player before his first regular season game represents an extraordinary level of confidence in what's coming next. Nike's approach with Sanders reflects a broader shift in how the company thinks about athlete partnerships. Rather than renting influence, paying flat fees for temporary endorsements, Nike appears focused on building equity. They want to grow with Sanders over the next decade, participating in his success rather than simply purchasing access to his fame. The prime equity clause in his NFL contract mirrors this philosophy. Everyone involved is betting on shared upside rather than guaranteed minimums. All that investment meant nothing without on-field performance. Marketing can generate buzz, but it can't sustain a phenomenon built on empty promises. Sanders needed to prove that the hype was justified. The Carolina game changed everything. All the speculation about whether Shedeur Sanders could actually play at the NFL level got answered in a single preseason appearance. 14 completions, 138 yards, 2 touchdowns, a passer rating that made him look like a seasoned veteran rather than a fifth-round project. The doubters who'd spent months questioning his talent suddenly had nothing to say. What made the performance remarkable wasn't just the statistics. It was the way Sanders carried himself throughout the game. Preseason contests are typically sloppy affairs, filled with nervous rookies making predictable mistakes and veterans going through the motions until real games begin. Sanders looked like he belonged from the first snap. His pocket presence was calm and controlled. His decision-making was sharp. His throws arrived on time and on target with the kind of accuracy that coaches spend years trying to develop. The eye test confirmed what the numbers suggested. This wasn't a player who needed time to adjust to professional speed. This wasn't someone who would benefit from sitting behind a veteran for a year or two while learning the system. Sanders looked ready. He looked like a starting quarterback who could contribute immediately to a team's success. And he looked like someone who'd been criminally undervalued by the 143 organizations that passed on him before Cleveland finally made the call. Social media erupted in real time. Every completion generated new waves of commentary. Fans who'd been waiting to see whether the hype was justified now had evidence to share. Analysts who'd questioned the draft slide suddenly pivoted to wondering how all those teams had gotten it so wrong. The momentum built throughout the game, reaching a crescendo when Sanders connected on his second touchdown pass and looked directly into the camera with a knowing expression. That's when the watch check happened. Sanders looked at his wrist, glancing at an imaginary timepiece, as if to say that this moment was always going to arrive. It was just a matter of when. The celebration was simple but loaded with meaning. Here was a player who'd endured months of criticism and character attacks, responding not with words but with performance. The message was unmistakable. Keep doubting. He'd prove you wrong eventually. Nike captured the moment instantly. Within hours, the brand had released a new advertisement featuring the watch celebration paired with their pre-prepared tagline. "Only a matter of time" became the phrase of the moment, spreading across platforms and embedding itself in the cultural conversation. The synchronization between Sanders' on-field success and Nike's marketing response demonstrated just how prepared everyone had been for this breakout. They'd known it was coming. They'd just been waiting for the world to catch up. The advertising generated approximately 200,000 likes on its primary post and accumulated millions of impressions across various platforms. Influencers shared the content. Sports media discussed it on broadcast programs. Rival brands watched as Nike dominated the conversation around one of the most buzzworthy stories in the sports world. The timing had been perfect, and the execution was flawless. For Cleveland, the preseason performance complicated their quarterback situation in the best possible way. The Browns had other options on the roster, including veteran Joe Flacco and fellow newcomer Dillon Gabriel. Before the Carolina game, the assumption was that Sanders would compete for a backup role at best, learning behind more experienced players while developing at a patient pace. After that performance, the conversation shifted entirely. The statistics told a clear story when comparing the options. Sanders posted a passer rating of 106 during the preseason, while Gabriel managed just 66 in his opportunities. The gap wasn't subtle. It was a difference between a player who looked ready and a player who looked like he needed more time. Whether coaching staff and front office personnel would acknowledge what the numbers showed remained an open question, but the evidence was hard to ignore. The buzz surrounding Sanders intensified with each passing day. Jersey sales continued climbing. Media requests flooded the Browns' communications department. National coverage that typically ignores preseason performances made exceptions for the story that was developing in Cleveland. A fifth-round pick was looking like the steal of the draft, and everyone wanted to understand how the league had gotten it so wrong. Sanders himself remained relatively quiet throughout the explosion. He did his required media obligations, but avoided extended commentary or victory laps. When asked about the critics who doubted him, he typically deflected with generic responses about focusing on improvement. When questioned about the jersey sales and endorsement buzz, he redirected attention to the team and the work still ahead. The approach was deliberate. Rather than engaging with the narrative, Sanders seemed content to let performance and results speak for themselves. This discipline proved harder to maintain as attention continued growing, because alongside the positive buzz came something else, something less celebratory. The same forces that had questioned his character before the draft weren't done. They were just getting started. Success attracts scrutiny. That's just how the sports world works. But the scrutiny directed at Shedeur Sanders after his breakout preseason felt different. It felt targeted in ways that went beyond normal criticism. It felt like certain parties were actively looking for reasons to tear him down, even as his performance and popularity soared to unprecedented heights. The speeding tickets became the primary ammunition. Earlier in the summer, Sanders had been cited for driving 91 miles per hour in a 65 zone and 101 in a 60. These were legitimate violations. Nobody disputed that he'd been speeding or that he deserved the citations he received. But the coverage that followed seemed wildly disproportionate to the offense. For days, the stories dominated sports media. Commentators treated the incidents like character-defining scandals. Executives who wished to remain anonymous leaked quotes suggesting this was evidence of the immaturity they'd warned everyone about. Here's where things get complicated. Sanders wasn't the first Cleveland Brown to receive speeding citations. He wasn't even the most prominent. Myles Garrett, the team's star defensive end and one of the best players in the NFL, has received similar tickets without generating anywhere near the same level of outrage. Veterans across the league get caught speeding regularly. it rarely becomes national news. It almost never gets framed as proof of fundamental character flaws. The double standard was hard to miss. When established players make similar mistakes, the coverage tends to be brief and forgiving. Boys will be boys. Athletes drive fast cars. It happens. But when Sanders did it, suddenly it became a referendum on his values, his priorities, and his readiness for professional football. The intensity of the backlash didn't match the severity of the offense. The character attacks extended beyond the speeding incidents. Critics labeled Sanders as entitled, suggesting he expected success to be handed to him rather than earned through hard work. They called him arrogant, interpreting confidence as a personality defect rather than a competitive asset. They accused him of caring more about his brand than his craft, as if building a successful business while excelling at your sport was somehow contradictory rather than impressive. Some observers pointed out uncomfortable patterns in how this criticism was framed. Terms like confident and swagger tend to be celebrated when applied to certain quarterbacks. Those same qualities get described very differently when attached to others. A white quarterback who believes in himself is often praised for leadership and competitive fire. A black quarterback who displays the same traits sometimes gets labeled as a problem, a distraction, someone who needs to be humbled. Sanders hasn't publicly engaged with these criticisms. He's kept his head down, continued working, and let the performance speak for itself. When reporters ask about the negative coverage, he typically deflects with short answers and redirects to football preparation. The discipline required to maintain that approach shouldn't be underestimated. Seeing yourself mischaracterized in national media, day after day, while knowing that responding would only amplify the negativity takes genuine emotional control. Inside the Browns' locker room, the dynamics remain complex. Sanders is competing for playing time with veterans who have their own expectations and supporters. Joe Flacco represents experience and stability. Dylan Gabriel was another investment the organization made during the same draft cycle. Coaches have to balance development, politics, and winning, often in ways that don't follow the cleanest logic. Even though Sanders' preseason numbers clearly exceeded his competition, nothing about his path forward is guaranteed. The oblique injury that briefly sidelined him added another layer of uncertainty. In the NFL, health is everything. One bad hit can derail even the most promising career. The injury was reportedly minor, but it served as a reminder that all the endorsement money and jersey sales and cultural momentum mean nothing if the body breaks down. Every player is one collision away from everything changing. Despite all the noise, Sanders has continued performing when given opportunities. His preparation appears meticulous. His teammates, at least publicly, have expressed support. The coaching staff has praised his work ethic even when questions about the off-field circus persist. Whether that translates into actual playing time and a genuine chance to compete for the starting position remains to be seen. What's clear is that Sanders faces a different standard than many of his peers. The same behaviors that get overlooked or forgiven in others become scandals when attached to his name. The same confidence that gets praised in certain contexts becomes arrogance when he displays it. The same business acumen that would be celebrated in tech entrepreneurs or finance professionals gets framed as a distraction when a young black athlete pursues it. None of this has slowed down his partners. Nike continues rolling out campaigns. Merchandise continues selling. The endorsement deal reportedly in development would shatter records for rookie compensation. Everyone betting on Sanders seems unconcerned with the narrative attacks that dominate certain media corners. They're looking at the actual numbers, both on the field and in the marketplace, and those numbers tell a very different story. The question now is whether performance can ultimately overwhelm perception. Can Sanders play well enough that even the harshest critics have to acknowledge his talent? Can he win games and lead a franchise in ways that make the character attacks irrelevant? That's the challenge ahead. Nike is reportedly finalizing a signature shoe line for Shedeur Sanders. Working names like LL2C and Proto92 have circulated among insiders, suggesting a comprehensive footwear collection rather than a single product. For a rookie quarterback who hasn't started a regular season game, this would be virtually unprecedented. It signals that the people with money on the line believe something special is unfolding. But this story was never just about shoes or jerseys or endorsement contracts. It's about who gets to control an athlete's value. For decades, the system ensured that teams, leagues, and corporations captured most of the wealth that players generated. Sanders challenged that structure before throwing a single professional pass, and now he's proving that the challenge was justified. If he succeeds, the prime equity clause becomes a template. Future generations of athletes will point to this moment and demand similar treatment. The power dynamics that have governed professional sports for decades will shift permanently. If he fails, the establishment will use his story as a warning. See what happens when you let rookies get too big for their position. Either way, Shedeur Sanders isn't just playing football. He's playing for the future of athlete empowerment itself. And right now, he's winning.